Good morning, everyone. My name is Wenjun Huang. I'm here at Seattle Children's Therapeutics. As Josh mentioned, I'm going to talk to you about the React application that we built on LabKey Server and show you how that helps us to streamline workflow and offer a unique user interface at the same time. First, a little bit background about our organization. So Seattle Children's Therapeutics is a division that sits under the bigger Seattle Children's Hospital umbrella. Within therapeutics, we specialize in building CAR-T therapy cures through our end-to-end capabilities. So just like a biopharmaceutical company, we have R&D group, we have technology development group, scientists there really do the cutting edge research to find the next cure. And we have GMP facility to manufacture those cure, and we have clinical development group to develop clinical trial protocols and run those. So once the trials are up and running, we receive patient specimen samples into the Correlative Studies lab, and combining the force of Correlative Studies lab and integrated data science group, we run through a bunch of assays on these samples and really get the insights out of the data sets that we have and feed that information back to R&D to drive the next generation research. So to date, we have 15 FDA authorized CAR T-cell INDs and have over 500 patients enrolled across all of those studies and other programs. The Correlative Studies Lab is really the main user of the LabKey server that we have here. And here's a high-level overview of how we use LabKey server. So when the patient is enrolled on the study, their clinical trial data is gathered and stored in clinical database. In this case, we use Medidata Rave, and that information is synced into the LabKey server through Medidata's API. And on the other hand, the research specimens are gathered and sent to the Correlative Studies Lab. And we have a set of analytical assays to run, and the raw data is then stored on the server. We bank the extra samples we have for these patients in our biorepository, and the sample availability information is also available on the server. So really on the LabKey server, we combine research data, clinical data, and the sample availability information. And then we surface those under each trial-specific study folders. And I'm talking about specimen collection. So here's a sample specimen collection schedule for someone enrolled on our trial. You can see we not only collect a lot of sample when they receive active treatment, but we also follow up with these patients for up to 15 years. So there's a lot of sample collection happening during the long-term follow-up period. Now, CSL is in charge of making the collection kits and send it to all the study sites, and also eventually receiving those samples. So one key aspect in our daily workflow is we want to make sure the patient identifiers that are put on those samples do match the system, do match the information that's in our system. And that gives rise to a CSL patient database. It's unique to our group, which is really aimed to be a lightweight database that tracks the relevant patient information, especially the enrollment information, their identifier, date of birth, initial, across all 500 plus patients on all of our trials and programs. This is used by a number of users in our specimen coordination group and also research scientists. And the main purpose of this is to enable us to look up that relevant patient information in a breeze. So here are some key requirements for this system. Most important one is we want to make sure the enrollment information is available in the system in a timely manner. Sometimes the patient got enrolled in the morning, and then the first collection kits needs to go out in the afternoon. So there's a urgency there. We also want to make sure the patient initial and date of birth is up to date in the system. So these two pieces of information is available in the clinical database. So what's really unique to this particular system is the next two points here. So first is we want to keep track of alternative initials used by patients. So as I mentioned, we followed this patient for quite some time. So after active treatment, they would go back to their home care institute or even local care institute. So the samples that we receive from these places, sometimes we would use alternative initials by these patients. For example, they would add an extra middle name in there, or they would put a dash or a hyphen. And since we follow patients for up to 15 years, they could get married and change their last name. So that information is not available in clinical database. And we need to keep track of that within our group to make sure we can still match those initials to the correct patient. And we also need to provide an intuitive view of patient enrollment history if patients are enrolled on multiple our trials. And that has happened a number of times, and there are many practical reasons why we want an intuitive view and easy for us to look up. For example, if the PI knows patient is enrolled on another trial, they might order an additional set of tests to be run on those samples. So we want that. The information is technically available in the clinical database, but you first will need to know which two participant ID or multiple participant ID belong to a single patient. And you go into these individual databases and get the information out. So it's not intuitive, and it takes quite some time to do that. So the first version of the CSL Patient Database was developed in Microsoft Access, and this was many years ago when our lab had a handful of members receive 2 to 3 specimen samples a day, and we manage a few dozens of patients across a few trials. So the system worked reasonably well, but today, we have 17 members received on average 6+ specimen samples a day, and already on the sample heavy day, it's more like 12 to 15 samples. And we manage over 100 active patients at any given time. So reflecting on those requirements, there are a number of growing pains as we try to scale this system to cater to a more demanding workload. The most important pain point really is the Access database is not connected to the clinical databases at all. So all of the data entry happened manually. So what would happen is there's an automatic email triggered from metadata when there's a new patient enrolled with their enrollment information and initial and date of birth. So someone would then need to take that information and put into this Access database. And if for some reason their initial and date of birth change due to maybe erroneous entry, we would have to rely on the site staff to notify us that. So that has caused the delay and data entry error in the past. In terms of keeping track of alternative initials and patient enrollment history, this was done using free text fields. So imagine if you have one patient that has 3 participant IDs on 3 different trials, and each row would have a alternative initials. And if that patient indeed have an alternative initial, you would have to update that field on all 3 rows. And sometimes that was not done consistently, so that causes discrepancy in our system. And lastly, talking about Access, this database is hosted on a virtual machine here in Seattle Children's Network. As more people are trying to access this database, the performance is sometimes degrades and this lags, and that's not really what you want to experience in a busy morning when you're trying to receive multiple samples in a short period of time. Since we already have the clinical database synced into our LabKey system, we figured we can come up with something, build a system just in LabKey on our LabKey server. But when we consider a system using out-of-box LabKey server UI, there's a couple limitations. Primary on first data entry, and the second is on data representation. So We can automate a lot of the data into the system. However, as I mentioned, we still need to keep track of alternative initials used by patient, and that needs to be entered manually. So there are two major ways you can enter data into LabKey. You can either use the data entry UI here, as shown in the screenshot, or you can use bulk Excel upload. So we didn't go with the Excel route because first, we are trying to move away from Excels. Second, most of the time, these alternative initials are one-off entry, one row at a time for each patient. So the built-in LabKey data entry UI seems the applicable way to go if we want to go this route. However, this data entry UI is fairly basic. There is no lookup or no smart lookup if we want to bring in additional information. There's no front-end data validation happening right when you entering the data. So if you want to do data validation, they either need to do trigger script, which happens on the server side, or you can apply regular expression in the list table itself, which also happened after the data is entered. Regarding data representations, we really want to aggregate or put everything into a single page. And we would want to limit the number of table that's available on the page so that user don't have to scroll up and down and try to do multiple filters on multiple tables at the same time. So one way of tackling this is through pivot table. So here's a very simplistic view of the data that's in the patient database. For example, you have one single patient that's enrolled on 2 different trials with 2 different trial IDs and different enrollment dates. And there's another patient with the same set of information. So we can pivot this to give you an sort of enrollment history view. So you read from left to right. For this patient, they were on this trial with this ID, and then they were on this trial with that ID. It may work fine if you only have 2 trials, but in reality, we have 16 trials and programs. So this table gets extremely wide. And majority of our patients only are enrolled on 1 trial. So you ended up with a lot of the white space with no information in there. And this is only 2 pieces of information. You got the person ID and the enrollment date. But really, we want to track their date of birth, initial, and a couple other fields. So it becomes even wider, the table. And if you want to concatenate some of the information, it's also pretty hard to read, and it's difficult to for the users to set up filters and really look for the information they want to look for. Regarding other trail and co-editing access, so nice thing about LabKey Server is first we have the compliant LabKey Server, so it's hosted on the compliant AWS server, so we don't have to worry about storing these PHI on there. The audit trail is available for lists. The slight limitation for that is the audit information or data change information is only accessible for the users with auditors and admin privilege. Nevertheless, since the data is already in LabKey, we have a very solid foundation to build a system that meets our need and can be customized to our specific workflow. So at a high level, here's how the data is going to flow. We have source data container where the clinical databases is feeding into these study folders with the information we need. We also have some manually curated enrollment information on the side, and these information are getting combined and the data is being sent to the patient database specific container. Where the data is then gets split into 3 separate tables for easy data management purpose. And each table would keep track of a specific set of information for our use. We used React UI to complement or address some of the limitation of built-in LabKey UI. So with React UI, we can have custom and adaptive data entry forms, and we can also build views that are specific to different users' permissions. We can do front-end data entry validation right at the time of data being entered, and we can have smart lookups to bring in additional information that's needed. Regarding the audit trail or change history, we came up with some programmatically constructed text, and we can parse those texts real time to provide a formatted audit trail for all the users right at the time of data entry, so they can see what has happened to those data entries. To really give you the complete picture of how this is set up, so we have the same data flow diagram that I want to point out. Even though majority of this is all automated, there are still two manual input points. One is we need to keep track of alternative initials used by these patients, but there are also some manually curated enrollment information we still need to keep track of for some legacy trials that are not managed in clinical databases. So the enrollment information is separate from the main patient database app, which the main purpose is to look up patient information. So really, we decided to do two separate React application and bring it under one single application umbrella. And this is how it looks like. And I'm going to do a live demo in just a minute. So this is just a high level, a couple of screenshots here and there, but you will see this in action in just a minute. So when users get into this space, they're greeted with this navigation bar, and there are a couple of links at the top. You get a set of links that allow you to toggle between the two apps. And also there's a link for us administrator, and this is all permission based. So I'm a system administrator, so I can see all three links. But if your role doesn't require you to have access to all three links, it would adapt based on that. But there's also a set of links that's going to be available for all users. Here's a quick look at the two apps. You see we adopted a cube based view where each participant or patient occupies a cube with the relevant information displayed in this cube. And we have icons that allows user to interact with them to have follow-up actions. And if you're new to the React world, everything's component based. So we lay out these components in logical way and keep number of components minimum, because the end goal of this is we really just want to develop a lightweight, easy to use, simple app, and that help us to minimize the amount of development work and we need to put in, and also make the app easy to maintain. So under the full umbrella patient database app, there is the navigation bar that you saw at the top, and then there's the two main application there. And then within the smaller ad hoc enrollment record management app, we have the cube view and also the ability to add and edit ad hoc records. So within the bigger main patient search app, have a search widget. We actually implement two separate types of view for different purpose. There's a cube view, there's a more traditional tabular view. And within the cube view, user has the ability to further either edit the alternative initial records, or have the option to view detailed enrollment history. Okay, with that, it's time to do live demo. So I do see there are questions in the Q&A. Josh, do you want me to address those right now or wait till the end?
Why don't you go ahead and do the demo, and we'll look back at the questions.
Okay.
At the end.
All right. Thanks. Cool. So here is our staging server, and for this demo, I came up with about 50 dummy patient data, so we can actually have some nice data to play with. So I'm currently logged in as myself, and throughout this demo, I'm gonna impersonate a couple other members in our group just to show you how the permission of individual user impact what they see in the app. So within the navigation bar, you can toggle between the two apps. So you can either look at the ad hoc records app, or you can go to the patient search app. So we'll start with the ad hoc records app. And it's all laid similarly, as I mentioned, it's the cube view. So you got participant's ID and their initial and date of birth. That's the most important thing for the user. because that's the patient identifier, the set of patient identifier they really need to verify the patient identity. With this, we have filters, and these are the available studies within this grid. So there's also an option to show you all the unverified records. For this demo, we can go ahead and create a new ad hoc record here. So we can create a test 001. I don't have to provide all the information from the get-go and come back and edit that later. So for the study name, it's a drop-down, but it's also a data list. So you can either pick value from the drop-down option, or you can just create a new study. And I can go ahead and create a save, and you will see this this participant ID then show up under the new study filter. So you can see that's also dynamic. So I can go ahead and keep editing that. And notice that at the bottom here, there's the activity log. That's what the structured free text that I was talking about, and that get parsed into this activity log where we break down the action, the user, and the date of that particular action. So I can add the initial and just do the initial for myself. So once I click save, it's going to appear here. It also shows you in the activity log. And we talked through how we're going to use this, and we ended up deciding we're going to track the activity of some of these fields, but not the comment field. So if I just type some comment and then I click save, that's not going to be reflected here because we decided it's common for people to just put in some extra comments, and we don't really need to show that in the activity log. And because this is all done on LabKey Server, we do have the full audit log on the list in the backend if we ever need to look that information up. And the other thing that's permission specific is you see there's a verify button. So we talked about how we're actually going to use this. We decided in this particular app, we are allowing the user who entering the data to verify their own records. So I can actually go ahead and verify that. And you can see all the information is logged. And the only place I can do is type in my initial and just say verify. And once I click verify, it's going to automatically bring me to this unverified filter. It's assuming I want to continue to verify all of these records. And if I come back to new study, you can see this now becomes view detail, and I can't change any of this. But if I do want to change something, I can just then do edit and then change this. And then again, that's going to be logged, and this button becomes verify. So that's the available action you can do on that. Some of the front-end data validation. So here, it's automatically going to assign a register ID for this particular patient, because this is the ad hoc data management. So we actually have a negative number, and you can actually look up some other numbers, and it's going to pull that. So for example, this is the register ID I want to look up, and I want to link the two patients and say these two are really the same patient. It's going to tell me this is the looked up value for this particular patient, and I want to make sure this matches with the information I put in here. So I can do that. And if I, for some reason, picked a ID that's not available, it's just going to error out and tell you I can't find anything. So let's move over to the main patient search app. And here, before I continue my demo, I'm going to impersonate a couple of users to show you how this navigation bar is going to adapt. So I am now impersonating a research scientist in our group whose main role just calls for them to look up the patient information when they work with the sample. So you can see actually all of those links disappear because there is no need for this particular person to toggle or go into the other app or manage the backend lists. So if I stop impersonating that person and impersonate someone in our specimen coordination group, So their role calls for the ad hoc data record management. So for them, they can toggle between the two apps, but they don't have access to the backend lists, which only the admin has. Okay. So I'm going to stop impersonate and I'm going to be myself again. So I can go ahead and use the search widget to pick a search criteria. So I can just pick this this study, which currently has 4 patients in there. We implemented this different view, as I mentioned. This is the cube view. It's easy to do the lookup and interact with all these icons. But once you slide this, it actually brings out a more traditional tabular view. And you might recognize this is actually LabKey's own built-in React component used in sample managers, biologics. So it retains the same pagination. There's the search box, and you can add custom buttons. In this case, we decided we can export this with PHI information, including the initial and the date of birth, or without initial, which just has the enrollment site and applicable arm and cohort information. However, if you come back to this, you see there's icons you can interact with, which shows you this more detailed enrollment information here in this panel. There's also no alternative initial at this point. However, there is this red exclamation mark, which actually means there's some unverified alternative initials here waiting to be verified. So you can see I added this initial a couple of days ago. So this is where we decided the person who entered the information cannot verify the same information. It needs to be another user. So this tells me it's added by the current user, so I can't verify that. The only action I can do is to remove it or change it. However, if I change to, again, the research scientist in the lab and then look for the same result, my main job duty doesn't require me to verify or edit any of the alternative initial. The only thing I can do is to search for the information. So to me, I don't have that pencil icon and I don't have that red exclamation mark. To me, all I see is there's no verified alternative initial. However, if I am part of the specimen coordination group, and my job requires me to verify and enter these initial. And if I come to the same filter, you see the same set of options is available to me. And I can see this is now, I can see this is entered by Wenjun, and I can verify that. So once I verify that, there's a little checkbox next to it, and then that shows up here. And when the scientists come here, they would be able to see this initial. And I can add additional information as I need. And that's just going to say it's added by me. And that's also logged here. One last thing is really the search bar. So the search widget. So we allow, this is the built-in, there's the and logic. So if I'm going to do a study name, this study, and I can search initial with an A in there, there's going to be one record. In addition, we can add additional condition. We can actually add infinite number of additional condition. And one of the pain point that people mentioned about built-in LabKey UI is you are limited to only 2 search criteria in your filter, and you're bound to this AND operation. However, we added the option for you to toggle to OR, so you can then do maybe one study or the other study, which gives you 3 results total. And this is how we're gonna scale in the future. So we currently have 500 plus patients in the system, but this flexible search criteria really allow us to scale and cater to more patients enrolled in the future. So that's the end of the quick demo, and we can go back to my slide and really finish this up with a couple last slides. So First thing is this React infrastructure and the code base can be really adapted to many other use cases with a similar setup. For example, you can do lab supply inventory where each cube shows you an inventory level of a reagent or a material with some expiry date in there. You can even do data request where someone submit a form and it shows you the title and who's responsible for that. And in summary, there is probably running out of time here. So building a React app on LabKey Server really brings the best of both the world together. With LabKey Server, you can integrate data from multiple data sources. And with the React app, you don't have to worry about data table management. You can keep information separated and only get information that's relevant for the user at the moment. It's fully customizable. The implementation option is also flexible. The example you see today is a full application, so there is very little LabKey UI in there, but you can also package this as a web part and just put it on one of the LabKey's page. And with that, I want to thank you, everyone, for your time. I want to thank our amazing Correlative Studies lab group. Sylvia is the front-end web developer who really did a lot of this UI development. Daniel, Katie, Tiana is the Specimen Research Coordination Group, help us to map out all the process and do a lot of testing. Thank Nick at LabKey for showing us a lot of the example and help us troubleshooting. And lastly, patients and family that motivated us to do a lot of the work that we do. Thank you.
Thanks, Wenjun, and it's always fun to kind of see the evolution path that some of these projects take as they get bigger and have new needs. We've got a handful of questions to try and move quickly, mostly on kind of the technical side. I guess first is looping back on a question that I was posed during my presentation about what's it like to be using LabKey cloud deployments and doing your own development. If you could speak briefly to kind of what your workflow is for getting code changes out to, say, the staging server.
Yeah, absolutely. So all of our code are packaged into file-based modules. So we have the code is stored on our GitHub. It's all version controlled, and we typically do a monthly sprint. And at end of the month, we would email the LabKey support team, mostly John, to put those modules onto our production server in one go. However, LabKey a couple of years ago, I think it's year 2020, you guys introduced probably the most amazing feature ever, is to for individual user, a system administrator, to hot swap those file-based modules. So that's how we work on the staging server, is we do a little bit of development, code testing, and then we'll manually load those modules onto the staging server. So we don't need to always send John that module to be put on there.
Great. And then I think you just spoke to this, but there's a question of, is the interface that you're showing here separate from LabKey, or is it a LabKey module?
This is, yeah, great question. This is a LabKey module, and in the LabKey module, you can specify this is the default module to be loaded onto this project, and it defaults to this URL, which is the React application itself. We did build ourselves, I kind of glossed over this, but this little icon here is the backdoor we built for our admins. If you click that, it actually brings you to the LabKey UI, where we can manage all the back-end list, and there's also the gear. We can do all the admin related stuff.
And that's actually a great segue to, I think, the last question we'll sneak in. Are you just using lists as the back-end database storage, or are you using other data types as well?
So in the data flows, we use LabKey Server to integrate data from a number of different data sources, and all the data tables are then stored within this container. And so in that end, that's the full backend, but really we're harnessing the power of LabKey Server to integrate data source from a number of data sources.